everyone. My name is Zhiyu, and today's presentation, I'm a PhD student at Penn State University, and today's presentation is based on my paper with Dr. Sungeun. So this paper is currently under review, and the goal of our paper was to provide a critical examination of the model of influence, of presumed influence, also known as the IPI model. So, based on a traditional media's direct effect model, media is expected to directly change the audience's behaviors via message exposure. However, we also know that sometimes the audiences don't find the messages persuasive. So in this case, the IPF model is arguing that even though individuals might not believe in the messages, they might nonetheless change their behaviors if they start thinking about how other people might potentially react to those media messages. So to provide a concrete example of this phenomenon, back in 2011, there was an explosion in the nuclear power plant in Japan, Fukushima. And at that time, misinformation was circulating on Chinese internet saying that the iodine in salt can help prevent the radiation poisoning. So we witnessed that some people started hoarding salt as a behavior. So according to the IPI model, this hoarding behavior could be better explained by the fact that some people might assume that other people would fall for the information and start panic buying salt, which might lead to the potential shortage of the product. So this is an example of, even though sometimes people might not fall for the misinformation, they might still change their behavior if they start thinking about how other people might fall for it and adjust their behaviors based on that. So here is a visualization of the IPI model starting from self-exposure, where individuals themselves are exposed to certain media messages. And then they basically project their own experience onto others, assuming that other people have also been exposed to similar media messages. So based on that, they further anticipate, or they further speculate about the extent of the media's influence on other people. Further, they anticipate that others will react to those media messages in certain ways. So in the end, individuals ask themselves, what should I do based on others' potential reactions? So here, a particularly important relationship is the relationship between other response and self-response. So based on the literature review, there are 4 types of self-response that individuals might engage in. First type of self-response is coordination. A typical example is strategic voting, where people might change who they vote for based on who they think other people might vote for. And second type of self-response is rectification. A typical example is when parents might support censorship on violent video games if they see those violent video games as having potential bad influence on their kids. And third type of self-response is defiance, where individuals do the opposite of what they think other people are doing. And the last one is conformity, where basically individuals conform to the perceived descriptive norms. A typical example is smoking behavior, where individuals might start smoking if they think that their peers might start smoking after being exposed to smoking campaigns. So our paper particularly focused on the conformity influence because we think there are certain issues with its rationalization. Specifically, if we look at the conformity literature, there are certain important conditions that should be met in order for conformity to happen. For example, first condition is the ambiguity of beliefs. When individuals themselves don't have a clearly formed belief, they might adopt other people's beliefs or behaviors in that case. And second condition is that there should be an actual indicator of the descriptive norm. For example, we all know that in Ash's famous conformity experiment, the participants could actually see that everyone else was agreeing on the wrong answer. However, in the IPI model, the IPI model does not meet those conditions. Specifically, in the IPI studies, individuals themselves are already pretty certain about their beliefs. For example, in the typical smoking context, most people already know that smoking behavior is bad for their health. And secondly, in the IPI model, there is no actual indicator of others' behaviors because everything is speculated based on individuals' own exposure to the media messages. So in this case, we argue that the alternative explanation, which is known as the projection effect model, should be more plausible. Basically, according to the projection effect, people project their own beliefs onto others, which results in an overestimation of its prevalence. There are a few mechanisms that explain this projection behavior, including memory accessibility bias, action salience bias, and individuals' need to self-justify. So to briefly explain one of the mechanisms, the memory accessibility bias, basically individuals' own memories of similarity and agreements tend to be more readily accessible than memories of dissimilarity and disagreement. This might lead to an overestimation of the consensus for one's preferred positions. So in our paper, we reviewed about 26 previous IPI studies, and here I'm only showing the IPI studies that focus on the conformity behavior. And a few things that I want to highlight is that first, a lot of the previous IPI studies did not examine the complete causal steps proposed by the IPI model. And secondly, we see that some of the findings were actually inconsistent, especially that some of the important causal steps were found to be non-significant. And lastly, few studies tested this alternative explanation proposed by the projection effect model, except for 2 studies that found support for this alternative explanation. So based on this, we conducted an online survey study with news article headlines in South Korea. Around half of our participants were males, and the mean age of the participants were 45 years old. So the topic that we chose was the Japanese nuclear wastewater release plan. In the July of 2023, it was an extensively debated issue due to its potential impact on Korean citizens' daily life. And in order to control for the order effect, we randomly assigned participants to 2 conditions where they were either shown the positive stance news first or the negative stance news first. So we measured variables in both negative stance news context and positive stance news context. And here, for simplicity, I'm only showing the results for the negative stance in the negative stance news context. So the first variable that we measured was individuals' own exposure to the media messages. In order to measure it, we measured participants' frequency of message exposure and the amount of attention they paid to the media messages. In a similar fashion, we also measured individuals' presumed others' exposure to similar message content. For self-influence, we used 3 measurement items. Here is an example of the measurement item. And then we averaged those 3 items to create a composite variable for individual self-influence. And we also, in a similar way, we measured individual presumed media's influence on other people. And for self-response, we measured individuals' intentions to decrease the future consumption of Pacific aquatic products. And then we also measured their presumed others' intentions to decrease the future consumption. On top of all that, we also measured individuals' own attitude toward the issue to control for its effect on other variables, because we know that the individuals' pre-existing attitudes might affect their recollection of their memories and of what happened in the past. So here is our model. Basically, we combine the IPI model with the projection effect model. The bold arrows indicate the causal steps proposed by the IPI model, whereas the thin arrows indicate the causal steps proposed by the projection effect model. And here we are particularly interested in the relationship between other intention and self-intention. So as we can see, only the arrow that goes from self-intention to other intention was shown to be significant. So how to interpret this result? Basically, it provides support for the projection effect model while disapproving the IPI model. And we see that the same result in both negative stance news context and the positive stance news context. So what does this tell us? Basically, we think the most important implication of our study has to do with its theoretical implication. So our study was one of the few studies that systematically compared the IPI model with the projection effect model. And our results provided empirical support for the projection effect model while disapproving the IPI model. So this invites potential reinterpretation of previous ICA findings that might instead be explained by the projection effect model, or there could be some potential boundary conditions that determine whether the arrow should go from self to other or the other way around. So that's it, and I thank you for your time.